BrightRock believes that with every change in life comes opportunity. The World Economic Forum puts change, its challenges, and its opportunities on a global stage. This World Economic Forum's special edition BizNews podcast is illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Theo de Jager, the president of the World Farmers Organization, here in our little makeshift studio at the World Economic Forum. Dr. de Jager, thank you for joining us here.
It's such a privilege to be invited to your platform. Thank you for that.
Your tenure as the president of the WFO, how long have you been in that position? And if I'm not mistaken, it comes to an end next month.
Yeah. I was the sixth president of the organization in 6 years. And now I've been hanging in there for 5 years. So it is time to go.
You're the first South African in this position, is that right?
Yes, I am.
How's your tenure been? And more challenges, more excitement, more discouragement than you anticipated?
24 hours after I was elected, I wanted to run away. The farmers' constituency is not the easiest constituency to organize. But it is the oldest in the world. It's the biggest profession in the world. And I think it's one of the best organized professions in the world. But no two farmers farm the same. The interests of no two countries are the same. And just like on any other level, the main function of the World Farmers Organization is to influence policies. We do advocacy. We just do it on the international level. But to influence policies, you need to have policies. Yeah. And that asks for consensus amongst farmers. That is the toughest part.
I want to take us to just a very broad starting point. A lot of the topics for discussion here, I tuned into one yesterday, was averting the global food crisis. And I want to use that as a starting point. Can you confirm the world is definitely in the midst of a global food crisis? And if so, what's contributing to that?
I'm running here from meeting to meeting, and the topic of all of these meetings is this food, energy, financing crisis. And the three do not come to the world in compartments. It's in one package. But the food crisis is the most desperate one. As the head of the World Food Program, David Beasley, said on Sunday evening, at the moment, we feel it in the price of food. But in 10 months from now, we will feel it in the availability of food. Because we need to plant now for the next season. And at the current price of fertilizers, diesel, agrochemicals, even seed, farmers wonder whether the price they receive for their products will cover the high input costs of now. So because of the kind of risks farmers are exposed to, farmers would rather plant less, while they should now plant more. And my message here at the World Economic Forum is the world must come on board. Private sector must come on board. Farmers cannot carry this risk alone. We now need special financing mechanisms to assist farmers to plant more. And that mechanism must be patient, sympathetic capital.
So much of what is also driving discussion here is, of course, the war in Ukraine. Would it be correct to refer to Ukraine as the breadbasket of the world? What is the ability of Ukraine? I've heard numbers of 400 million people that can be fed by that country when it's not in a state of war. And everybody is appealing to unblock the port of Odessa. What is stuck there?
40 million tons of grain is currently stuck in Odessa. It is especially the Arab-speaking world that is already in a massive crisis. That part of the world which lives in desert environments and who cannot really feed their own populations from the breadbasket. They need to exchange from other sectors of the economy to buy food. And a majority of them were dependent on Ukrainian and Russian grains. Remember, Russia is also a massive producer. Between the two of them, they are responsible for close to 30% of all the grain which crosses borders. So it is the war, but before the war, we already had a crisis. The price of fertilizers and diesel was already through the roof just after the COVID pandemic, at the end or towards the end of the COVID pandemic. Now the world is rushing around to see how can they replace the gap, how can they plug the gap which the Ukrainian grains have left. Remember, not all of that grain is lost. I had the privilege to visit Hungary 3 weeks ago, and I met some of, well, I asked to meet the farmers, but the men are not allowed to cross the border. So I met with their wives, and they are planting. They put on bulletproof vests and they are planting. They are planting for a crop, for a harvest of more or less 30 million tons, but it's a far cry from the 144 million tons which we usually get from them. The fact is that that food must come from elsewhere now, and the world is really looking at Africa. Here we sit with more underutilized fertile soils and untapped groundwater sources than anywhere else in the world. The problem is the policy environment is not conducive to the kind of risky investments which we now need to plug that gap.
I heard an interesting comment. We are taking from the hungry to give to the starving. That's the point at which we're at. In terms of agriculture's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, as a food chain, how big a culprit is the agricultural sector, and are you looking to scale back that impact?
For sure. Every farmer in the world can do better. Every farmer knows exactly what he can do better. And while we are working towards that, I cannot tell you how much pressure I am here at the World Economic Forum to explain our footprint on nature, our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. But I'm fighting back because I simply do not buy into the narrative that our emissions should be compared to the emissions from the energy sector or the transport sector. We do not use that much fossil fuels. It is only in our machines. The big issue on emissions is actually methane from ruminants, from cattle mostly. And you cannot compare that to the emissions from fossil fuels because it's in a very short cycle. Methane breaks down mostly to carbon within 10 to 12 years. And when that carbon comes down again, it is taken up by plants, the very plants we farm. It is taken up and sequestrated through the roots where it belongs in the soils. We are the only industry which can work on the other side of the balance sheet. Do not only judge us on our emissions, also see what we sequestrate in this industry. Hence, my message here to both policymakers and the captains of industry is we are not your biggest problem. We are your only solution as farmers. There is no way we can feed a world in a carbon-free environment, but we can get to net zero. To get to net zero implicates some kind of accounting system. And let's agree on that accounting system first and see then what we can contribute to it.
I watched a talk you gave at the NFU in England I think it was in February or in March, and the NFU has committed to net zero by 2040. Is that correct? And for people who don't understand exactly what that means, what is net zero and how do you achieve that in the agricultural sector?
Net zero means that you sequestrate as much carbon as you emit, or you can even go beyond that. And yes, the British farmers were the first to take this very courageous step to say we commit our industry to net zero. Followed, of course, by the New Zealanders, the Danish. Our farmer structures in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia are still actually quite far from there. Simply because the outcomes is not only in our hands. We need some changes in the policy environment. You know, to go to net zero asked a lot of investment from the farmers. There's no more important investor than the farmers themselves on their farms. But how do you invest if you do not have security of tenure? How do you convince a communal farmer to invest in his soils if he might be moved to another portion of land by the tribal authority who grants the permissions to occupy? How do you invest in your soils in the South African situation on a farm with land claims on it if you're not certain that you will be around in 2 or 3 years to benefit from that? So for us to follow suit, we need to put a lot of pressure on our government to bring more certainty of tenure.
You've spoken about small-scale farming, communal farming, and how it is sometimes romanticized, but it's actually a poverty trap. Will you explain that?
There's a lot of smallholder farming in Africa, which is over-romanticized by NGOs and even policymakers in the debates here. This morning I was in a debate where I just shook my head, said, no one chooses to be a smallholder farmer in Africa. A vast majority of them never chose agriculture as a career. Life just found them there. And it's a poverty trap in the sense that they do not own the land. They do not have access to financing. They do not have proper equipment. They are delivered to hand-hoe farming. And the yield is as much as you can have from 1 hectare. This is more or less what you can work with a hand-hoe in a year. And if the yields is, according to the FAO, less than 1 ton of maize per hectare, for example, who can live from that? Who can live from a turnover of more or less 50 euro cents per day? Which family? And that's why youngsters do not choose to be smallholder farmers in Africa. They want to run away from it at the first opportunity they get. We must commercialize that sector. We must mechanize it. We must modernize it. We must give them a market. Only then can we fight the dragon of poverty, because there's only one way actually to fight poverty, and that's through the creation of wealth. But agriculture can do it. It can do it in a shorter space of time and a broader basis than any other sector can.
You've spoken about the main purpose of agricultural organizations around the world, including your own, is advocacy. It's to influence policy. Are you sitting around the right tables? Has agriculture traditionally been sidelined?
Yes, it is only recently that we were afforded a place around the table. You know, if you do not have a place around the table, you can be sure you're actually on the main menu. It's so important that farmers be heard where policies are discussed. I'm sure you have seen that many of us, even yourself, get criticized for being here at Davos, for being part of the discussions at the World Economic Forum, as if it is this place where the world is controlled from. The fact is that there is no other place in the world and on the annual calendar where you have more policymakers and decision makers together in one place. Heads of state, MDs and CEOs of the world's biggest companies are here. If we want to influence policies, we need to be where the policymakers are. You need to have their ear. And there's this wonderful opportunity here to make sure that the voice of the farmers are heard in the most critical and strategic debates in the world.
You are still tuned into the World Economic Forum Special Edition BizNews podcast, illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes. Let's take it back home to South Africa. You've been farming since 1997, I read. What is the state of agriculture in South Africa at the moment?
May I be as arrogant as to say that we really have some of the most competitive farmers in the world in South Africa. It's a very special breed of people who compete for space on shelves and shops globally with zero assistance from the state, delivered to much more than the risks the average farmer in the world has to face. Because we also have a security situation, farm attacks, farm murders, in the numbers which we see in wars. And we fight off the threat of expropriation without compensation all the time. Yeah. But apart from that, we still maintain a status as a net exporter of food. We've never had a national food crisis in South Africa. We have, on household level, food insecurity. And it needs to be addressed because nothing stops a hungry man. But we still maintain our status as a net exporter of food.
Are we as a country sufficiently able to exploit export opportunities? Or do we do it despite the challenges we face? Our roads are a mess. Crime is a mess. Our ports are a mess. Transnet, the SOEs that are supposed to help to streamline things are in absolute disarray in South Africa. How hard is it to export as a farmer from South Africa?
You know, the export market is an absolutely sophisticated, challenging market. You have to meet the highest standards in the world. Every farmer is actually every day in competition with the best other farmers in the world, and especially on the export markets. Somebody said to me this morning, congratulations, I read that farmers in South Africa are fixing the potholes of the roads in the rural areas. And I had to say to him, it's not because we feel sorry for the common good. It's just cheaper to fix a pothole than to buy new tires every week. To export, you need ports. We have ports in South Africa, but they are so dysfunctional that some export farmers this year decided to change to new commodities simply because they cannot get their table grapes through the port. They cannot maintain the cold chain as they should. It is a major concern just to get a slot in ports and then to get your fruit or your product in the kind of condition which is demanded by the export markets.
Influencing policy is organized agriculture, and I know you have a history from various Pan-African agricultural organizations to Agri-SA. Is organized agriculture sitting around the table with the South African government enough? Is there enough of a meeting of minds there?
No. The South African government prefers to speak to farmer structures who would agree with them. They don't like people asking difficult questions. And as soon as you do that, you are usually excluded from the debates. So a few structures in the environment in which I operate in South Africa has actually decided to keep on asking these difficult questions and knocking on the doors and kicking doors until they allow the more critical voices too. For example, we have just seen the signing off of a master plan for agriculture last Thursday in Parliament. There are some beautiful stuff in there, but all of it hinges on the condition of transformation, even the profitability and the sustainability of agriculture. You know, if you put transformation before efficiency, you end up with what we now have in the NEL and our public health system and Eskom and SABC. And a number of our organizations simply said, no, first put efficiencies, first put profitability and sustainability, then you have something to transform. And it's not only the predominantly white structures who are calling for this. More and more successful black farmers say, we want a healthy policy environment. And for us, a healthy policy environment is one in which we can farm profitably. If it's not profitable, it is simply not sustainable. then it's a welfare case, and we have too much of that in Africa.
We're not here to discuss politics, but you can't get away from the land question, expropriation without compensation, amending Section 25 of the Constitution. Are you, as the World Farmers Organization, but obviously you're a South African as well, looking very carefully at what's going on in Parliament and debates around EWC, as they call it?
Michael, I do not represent the South African farmers in the World Farmers Organization. I was nominated there by the Zimbabwean farmers. So my home constituency is the Zimbabwean Commercial Farmers Union. And, you know, so many farmers, especially here in Europe, ask us, are you on the same trajectory as Zimbabwe? What will prevent you from ending up there? Now, my answer, and I believe in it with every cell in my body, is no. We're not like a rat in a pipe on a Zimbabwean trajectory. For a few reasons. Firstly, we have something which Zimbabwe never had. And that is an example on our doorstep how not to do it. Now, of course, my cousins, who were some of the first to lose their land in Zimbabwe in 2000 already, always say to me, your argument would only be valid if a majority of people in South Africa have soft ears for the voice of reason. But then, if a majority of people in South Africa do not have a soft voice for the voice, a soft ear for the voice of reason, we never had a future in South Africa, and I will never buy into that narrative. But then, we already see how an emerging middle class in South Africa started to dig in against certain policies. People who are impressed by policies such as expropriation without compensation is usually the poorest of the poor, the least educated, people in deep rural spaces. And this is not who South Africa is. Already, we have more people living in cities than in rural areas. We already have grown a middle class who forms the majority of our population and who has a car to pay and a house and who has to pay school fees every month and who's no longer impressed with this kind of jargon. We can be successful in land reform if we can keep it corruption-free and nepotism-free. If we can unlock the wealth on millions of hectares owned by government. Government bought so many farms in the last 20 years, which they never transferred to black farmers. That's why they did not create a class of profitable black farmers, which should be the ultimate aim of land reform. And the most successful stories of farmer development in our country is driven by private sector, mostly the agricultural businesses. Most of them based on the Chapter 6 plan of our National Development Plan, the partnership-driven model. I think land reform would go much further if they privatize it.
I'll end off by asking you what the legacy is that you want to leave behind as you exit office next month. What's the most important advancement or objective that you feel you have successfully attained while in office, and what still eludes you?
It is definitely not the fact that we are on a wonderful position financially. It is that too. It's not the fact that we represent more farmers today than any other organization ever represented in the world, both in terms of our members and their members. We do not represent all the farmers in the world, but no one represents more farmers than we do. It is definitely also not the fact that we found a place around the table on every multilateral platform where agriculture is discussed today, whether it is the UN General Council, whether it is the UNFCCC or any of the other UN agencies, or platforms like here at the World Economic Forum. The most important, I would say, is that we managed to establish a sense of camaraderie, a sense of belonging amongst family farmers across the globe. And there's nowhere better to see it than in the current campaign to do something about climate change, biodiversity, and nature-friendly farming, not through any decision in the UN or the EU, but in a kind of a farmer-to-farmer agreement to take care of our soils, a commitment amongst family farmers that I will leave this portion of the planet, of which I'm the custodian for a very short time, in a better condition to the next generation than what I found it in. And it's peer-to-peer pressure to do that. And by doing that, we already address more than 90% of the biodiversity and climate issues.
Well, Dr. Theo de Jager, it's a pleasure to see you again. The last time we came across each other was 2006. We were on our way to the Sapico tea farm, and you flew us down in a very small plane to Limpopo, and we went to have a look at just some of the failed restitution projects there. Well, we truly wish you luck as you end off your tenure, and thank you for speaking to us here at the World Economic Forum.
Thank you for affording me your platform.
Thanks for tuning in to this World Economic Forum special edition BizNews podcast illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes.